let's make a start. So as I say, we're going to look at exploring EDI in education, looking at outcome versus input, and the benefits of equality, diversity, and inclusion in an educational perspective, in an educational context. And this, of course, is part of the NCFE Professional Development Week, and we're really happy that you've been able to join us today. And thank you for taking the time in such a busy time of your academic year to join us today. So I'm going to say some hellos, and then I'm going to turn my camera off so that we can focus and concentrate and see the full screen. So my name is Janet King. I'm the Sector Manager for Education and Early Years here at NCFE. And a little bit about my background there that you can read for yourself on the screen. But I think equality, diversity, and inclusion is absolutely core to what we do in terms of social justice, in terms of education that's going to help and to raise aspirations in everything that we do. And I know it's at the core of what you want to achieve with your students as well, in terms of their opportunities, their choices, and the experiences that they have. Today, I'm representing Helen, and Helen Scanlon is our Provider Development Team Manager, and Helen has contributed to this presentation, to these slides, and so I will be reading from Helen as well, reading her contributions for you. And we can see that Helen has got over 30 years in education. Helen's experience includes work-based learning and apprenticeships, specialist learning for Barnardo's, FE and HE, secondary school, taking part in Ofsted inspections and quality assurance. And Helen is passionate about the continuous professional development within education. And her focus is on inspiring teachers and assessors to be the best that they can be. We're also going to include Gemma McGregor. So let's have a look at Gemma. So here's Gemma, and I'm also going to represent the contributions from Gemma today. And Gemma has built some slides into this presentation that we will share and look at together. And Gemma is a provider development officer, an experienced teacher. Gemma has worked across diverse educational settings, and she's passionate and in engaging in educational research and promoting life-changing opportunities through education, something that you do and contribute to every single day. What I will say is that this presentation will be recorded. It's being recorded right now. So your cameras are off, but you do have control of your mic. You also have access, I think, to a chat. So if there are any questions, if anything comes up during the presentation, do feel free to pop things into the chat. And if there's time, we'll go back to that at the end. Otherwise, I will look at those and we'll feed that back as we go. So I'm going to turn my camera off now, and then we'll concentrate and focus on the presentation. Thank you. So let's start by reading through the outcomes for this session. We're going to explore values and principles of inclusion and diversity and the benefits of an inclusive approach. We're going to explore a range of educational experiences for inclusive practice. And we're going to focus on those benefits of inclusive practice. So let's begin by looking at those benefits and focus in on that. Why do we strive towards an inclusive approach? So let's begin with looking at what the theory says. And to start us off, Helen's asked me to include some underpinning theory for review. The first quote here is from an Ofsted blog, and it acknowledges academic achievements, but brings in the more important, wider impact an inclusive approach can have. The wider or softer skills, as we sometimes know them and refer to them as, which benefit society as a whole, can be developed in an inclusive learning environment. So embedding this into everything we do is really important and beneficial to the learners that we're advancing and progressing via our work. The second takes this further by identifying the types of skills and knowledge that can be developed if we take the approach that we need an inclusive approach to be successful in society. The wide range of skills, competencies, and strengths an inclusive approach allows for and nurtures cannot be underestimated. And you will have seen the benefits of that. You'll have seen how students have been involved, included, how we go for that pupil-centered or student-centered approach, and the opportunities and experiences that that then sort of opens up for those particular students, and the difference that that can make in the choices, the inspirations, and the aspirations in what those students go on to do. And if you can actually think of any of those occasions, if you're thinking now about, yep, I remember, the effort, the investment that we have to sometimes put into our teaching and learning to make sure we're creating that inclusive environment to give that opportunity and that choice and that voice to be involved. Just pop something down into the chat about how you continue to inspire your learners through an inclusive environment. It's really helpful, I think, for other people to be able to see the sorts of differences that you make, and we should be celebrating your achievements in this area as we go. So the next point Helen asked me to include relates to what an inclusive approach is. This first image represents the range of people we work with using dots and circles. The images are self-explanatory. Now, Helen has gone on to say that she's used them in teacher education before, and teachers found them accessible, a good visual representation of the different terms. If we look there at exclusion, we can't break in. Integration, we're coming in, but we don't feel part of something. Segregation, you're actually excluding people. And inclusion, it's difficult to actually see a categorization. We are looking at a whole. And so it's a really nice model when you're using this with students, and you might be able to use something, or you might use something similar, or have some questions about this model. But it really helps to give that idea of when we think of inclusion, we might think of the word integration, but we need to make sure that that integration doesn't lead to segregation. Inclusion is about feeling absolutely part of something and being involved and having the same choices and experiences. And that sort of leads us on to the next image that Helen has shared here. So Helen's first contact with the adult learning inspector at pre-Ofsted days was an inspector asking her as a newly qualified teacher, "What does inclusion mean to you, Helen?" To which Helen replied, "It's about treating everyone the same." Oof. When the inspector gave her a questioning look, and I'm sure you're all kind of rolling your eyes at this one or thinking, "Oh, Helen," her reply was, "It's actually about treating everybody differently." And thankfully, this reply was received far more positively. Perhaps that resonates with you, because what we do want is for people to have the same choices, the same opportunities. So the reality in that first column, in that second image there, some people will have more choice. We're trying to be more equal, so we're giving everybody the platform to stand on, but we can't all see what's going on here. We're giving equity, and then we're providing justice. We're removing the barrier, and this is what inclusion is all about. It's about removing those barriers. So what does that look like in practice? For this part, Helen asked me to tell you a story about one of her trainee teachers, a PGCE student she worked with for a couple of years. And for the sake of it, I'm giving her a name now because it helps me to explain, and I'm going to call her Julie. Julie had multiple modern language degrees. She worked full-time and attended her teacher training course on a part-time evening basis. As part of her course, she volunteered teaching disaffected 16-year-olds to get the teaching hours required to pass the course. She didn't drive, so she used public transport everywhere she went. She'd lived abroad, Julie, for the degree when she was learning, was extremely highly motivated and reliable, professional, intelligent, inspirational. She lived alone and was a confident and competent member of society. She was great. To be in my class, Julie presented me with ongoing challenges to ensure she was able to access the course, the learning materials, the classroom activities, and she needed support to help her to put her teacher training learning into practice in the classroom. So having regular additional tutorials and support from Helen. This was because Julie was blind from birth. All the session resources were translated into Braille by the learning support team, and Helen had to have the Braille resources sent over for Julie's for Julie to consider at least a couple of days in advance of the sessions, to give her the opportunity to pre-read them so she could fully participate, prepare, contribute, be involved. Every other student in the class wanted to work with Julie as they gained an insight into how a visual impairment might impact on a learner in their teaching or classes. She was an absolute inspiration to the young people she taught in her voluntary role. If she could make a success of her life, then so could they. Julie always remembered the names of her students, how she knows people, such a positive person to be around. She joked about what she could and couldn't do, made everyone feel at ease around her, and really made others more confident in their own ability to progress and achieve. Helen goes on to say that she absolutely misses teaching Julie and seeing her succeed. There were so many benefits to having Julie in her class and on the PGCE course. The topic on inclusive praxis taught itself. So I guess Helen's message here is that we must always remember that we should focus on what people can do rather than what they can't do, and use case studies such as the one that Helen often referred to moving forward within her teaching career. Everyone is different. Everyone has strengths that they bring to the learning environment, which we can utilize, we can use to, so always focus on what the benefits are, rather than any additional work or activities you might need to carry out to make sure that your learning environment is truly inclusive. And I think it's all about that investment, isn't it? Investment to make sure that that everybody within that class, everybody within the group has got a voice, is heard, and is able to contribute. So Helen wanted to finish her section with some positive images and to thank you for your time. And if anyone has got any questions that they'd like for me to take to Helen, please pop those into the chat and we'll follow those up after the session. I will be able to share them with Helen, and we will get back to you about anything that you might want to ask Helen in particular. And she's just sharing those images because I think they are quite powerful images when you look at them in terms of what do we understand by inclusion? What does it mean? And for me, it goes beyond it includes, but goes beyond a recognized ability level. It goes into our own experiences, our own identities, our own culture, our own social experiences, our closest environmental experiences in terms of those aspirations and so on. Feeling part of something is absolutely crucial to that sense of belonging and that healthy disposition to learning in education. And it can be a feeling of social inferiority as much as it can be a sense of how do I make sure I have the specialist resources, equipment, and so on to be able to actually include an individual in a teaching teaching and learning environment. And it's often important to remember that as well, that it goes beyond the obvious when we think about inclusive and diverse environments, of course. And that leads us really to, I've clicked the wrong way, let's go the right way, to talk about alternative provision and how that can really support us. So let's take a moment to think about this aspect of equality, diversity and inclusion, and how this is used and what the challenges are in terms of an ever increasing provision in our educational environment. So what do we mean by alternative provision? And you can pop some ideas and some keywords and what it means to you in the chat, because that, again, will be really useful for Helen and Gemma and myself and Charmaine to think about and what your ideas are. What we have here is the DfE's definition of alternative provision, and that's provided through the DfE Alternative Provision Statutory Guidance, and it defines AP, alternative provision, as education arranged by the local authority for children resident in their borough in the following circumstances. Children who have been excluded, previously referred to as permanently excluded from school, children who are not able to attend school due to significant health needs, and that's a very broad statement, isn't it? Pupils directed by schools to off-site provision to support improvement of behaviour, and that was included by the DfE in 2016. We have a rising number of exclusions. Suspension numbers and rates have increased compared to previous terms quite recently. 263,904 suspensions were reported in the spring term of 22 to 23. This is an increase compared to both the autumn terms of 22-23, when there were 247,366 suspensions, and the previous spring term of 21 to 22, when there were 201,090 suspensions. Suspensions are typically higher in autumn term than in spring and summer, so spring 22 to 23 is a change from that trend and the highest recorded number of termly suspensions. 263,904 pupils, young people, were suspended in the spring term of 22-23. There are a rising number of attendance-related issues. The most common reason for suspensions and permanent exclusions remains persistent disruptive behaviour. And we have to get beyond that, don't we? We have to start thinking about, well, why? What's the underlying cause? We're dealing with what's happening and what's presenting itself in the classroom. How do we actually tackle this from the other side? Are we providing an inclusive environment where these children, where these young people are having their needs met and they feel a sense of belonging and part of something that they can readily and comfortably contribute to? The most common reason for suspensions and permanent exclusions remains persistent disruptive behaviour. Reasons that children are referred to alternative provision include exclusion, being at high risk of further suspensions or exclusion, and this is a managed move arrangement and requires the school to lead on securing the consent of parents, carers. Medical reasons, either physical or mental health, as agreed with a medical consultant. Recommended as the most suitable education provision for a child as outlined in their education, health and care plan. So SEND related. Alternative provision education should, where it can, be full-time unless there are specific reasons why this is not possible, and that could be medical treatments, other specified interventions. So while full-time is not defined in law, pupils should receive the same amount of education through alternative provision as they would receive in a maintained school, which is coming in at around 25 hours per week. I just want to take you through a report, Alternative Provision in Local Areas in England, which is a thematic review. And this report identifies systemic issues that affect practice in particular areas. And those particular areas are what we're looking at now on this slide. The impact of alternative provision on children. And what this report is telling us, the extent to which children in AP have positive experience and outcomes, and how local area partners assess and monitor this. The role of alternative provision is being defined as the purposes for which local area partners are using alternative provision and the models they are using to achieve these purposes. There is an increasing number of students now engaged in AP. And again, it would be interesting to hear any comments in the chat if you have students that are accessing AP, and what sorts of reasons that has led to that decision in the best interest and for the best outcomes for those children. Strategic planning, the extent and content of local strategic plans for alternative provision and who is involved in this process. Placement decisions, the factors that schools and local authorities consider when deciding to place children in alternative provision. The oversight arrangements, how schools and local authorities monitor and review the effectiveness of AP placements, and that should be on an ongoing basis. And transition arrangements, the support that children receive when moving either into or out of alternative provision placements. The report goes on to tell us that good registered alternative provision provides high quality education, but also balances that with the fact that too many children's experiences are negative. So we are using alternative provision to bring back the quality of inclusive, equitable education, but too many children's experiences are negative. What do we think about this? Ideas in the chat, please. A lack of national standards around the commissioning and oversight of alternative provision is leading to inconsistent outcomes for children and young people. You may agree with some of these findings. You may have actually had really good experiences where children have been in AP. You may represent an alternative provision yourselves. How do you maintain the quality? Local areas are unclear on roles and responsibilities. This is coming from the report, leading to inconsistency, an inconsistent picture nationally. As we've already said, when we've looked at some of these decisions and some of these main areas within the thematic review, that alternative provision plays a very important, significant role in the SEND system and for children with mental and physical health needs. So the DFE's alternative provision goes on to describe education arranged by local authorities for children who, because of exclusion, illness or other reasons, would not otherwise receive suitable education. Education arranged by schools for children on fixed period exclusion, off-site provision where schools direct children to improve behaviour. As set out in those descriptions above, both schools and local authorities can commission alternative provision. School governing bodies are responsible for arranging education from the sixth day of a fixed period exclusion, and local authorities are responsible for arranging education for permanently excluded children. And for other children who would not otherwise receive suitable education. However, in reality, a lack of suitable specialist provision has meant that alternative provision is also used inappropriately as a stopgap to fill deficiencies in local SEND systems. So where we are not able to meet children and young people's needs in an efficient way, we turn to alternative provision, and the report is telling us that in some cases that's of high quality, and in other cases children and young people are having negative experiences. So there's a lot of work to do here. I actually strongly believe, I'm an advocate for alternative provision. I think done well, this can actually be something that all children and young people could benefit from. but it needs to be something that is of high quality and that gives that, we talk about a suitable education. It needs to be inclusive. It needs to allow for that equitable experience. It's not a stopgap. It's not an alternative in terms of can't hack mainstream, going to go to AP. It's not about that. It's about meeting the individual needs of our children and our young people, as I know you know. So the number of alternative provision placements in state-funded schools, independent schools, and unregistered providers over time is also considered within the report. And it finds that the lack of national standards and clarity around who is responsible for AP commissioning and oversight are leading to inconsistent outcomes for children and young people. When commissioned by schools or local authorities, this is when pupils have been excluded or can't attend mainstream, for example, due to complex medical, social, or emotional needs. Currently, not all alternative provision needs to be registered or inspected, meaning there's a lack of oversight of children and young people in unregistered alternative provision. And we've got to be mindful of that and tackle that and make sure that we are absolutely using, accessing, and being mindful of the alternative provision that our children and young people are accessing. While good registered provision plays an important role in providing high quality support, care and education to vulnerable children, the report goes on to say that it finds too many children and young people's experiences are negative and that the overall picture is a system in desperate need of reform. Many attending alternative provision experience a highly disrupted education, with one parent describing the situation as soul destroying. One child also spoke about feeling abandoned by their home school. The report highlights some examples of good practice, including some local areas successfully supporting children and young people in transitioning out of alternative provision. However, decisions about placing children and young people into this provision are not always considered thoroughly enough, and the effectiveness of placements not properly monitored. These issues are compounded by a lack of clear purpose for the use of alternative provision and poor strategic planning. Inspectors also found that agencies do not always collaborate and health partners often are not involved in decision making about individual alternative provision placements. They go on to make some recommendations. Because again, despite all of that, alternative provision can really, really, really be the answer for a lot of our children and young people. We just have to get it right. And this report is helping us, I guess, to get it right. So it's a report worth looking at. The report sets out a series of recommendations to improve the commissioning and oversight of alternative provision, which will help children and young people both while they are attending and after they leave the education system. And these include those recommendations that we can see there on this slide. Better guidance on the purposes of alternative provision and potential indicators of success. Clearer roles and responsibilities for different local area partners with more clarity on how health and social care partners should also be involved in strategic planning for this provision and for the commissioning and oversight of individual placements. Improved oversight of certain groups of children and young people in provision, including through the introduction of a proportionate registration and inspection regime for all alternative provision. Greater consistency and rigour in decision making about individual placements and subsequent monitoring and evaluation arrangements. It's difficult to get a complete view of the alternative provision sector. That's clear. We don't have that. Combining pupil level data from the DfE's school census and AP census, the report estimates there were 67,600 placements in January 23, an increase of 13% from 2022. This comprises 25,000 placements in registered state-funded provision, 31,000 in registered independent schools, and 11,600 in unregulated provision. So there's a difficulty there already and an inconsistency in how we are being able to monitor the EDI and the experiences that children are having. The DFE sometimes does not consider placements of children with education healthcare plans in independent special schools as AP placements, though they are recorded and published as part of this census. In January 23, there were 24,600 placements commissioned by schools in registered and unregistered provision. These are not necessarily additional placements, as some may have also already be part of the numbers we've just looked at. The most common reason recorded for schools was off-site placement for behavioural support. 56% of these placements, as we made that point earlier, were made for this reason. Most children who spend time in alternative provision are identified as having some level of SEND, and they may be referred to social services for a child in need assessment during their schooling to stay in mainstream education, rather than go into alternative provision, to receive social care services for their health needs, in preparing for next steps, and when moving between services and providers. So good alternative provision. We hear from Martin Oliver, the chief inspector. Good alternative provision provides invaluable support for children and helps them engage with their learning. So it's trying and striving towards the EDI. However, we are concerned that some children's education and care falls below the standard they deserve, and we need to seek more clarity about alternative provision so that we can use this effectively for that consistent positive approach, a consistent positive experience for the children and young people. He goes on to say, we also remain concerned about the widespread problems with unregistered alternative provision. And there's been a calling, after 12 years of calling for the mandatory registration for alternative provision, he calls again and seeks for more reform, again to bring equality and to actually make sure that the experience is for all our children, remembering that there's an increase in the children and young people, the students that we're working with, that are seeking alternative provision for many reasons. And I'm hoping that when I'm able to access the chat at the end of the session, that you'll have shared some experiences maybe of your experiences in terms of accessing alternative provision, or any case studies that you can think of.
I'm wondering, Janet, if you'd like me to read out some of the comments in the chat, because there's a lot coming through.
That would be lovely.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
So I'm not going to go all the way back through, but there was a lovely comment here where it says appropriate training and more staff to support around behaviour could really make a difference to keeping children in a school rather than ending up in alternative provision. Exclusions are damaging to children, and schools have real opportunities to turn things around for children, but they're also dealing with a range of other expectations which don't always encourage the work and time needed with children with attachment issues that lead to behaviour issues. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, Janet.
Well, first of all, absolutely agree 100% with that comment, and thank you for sharing that, because I absolutely know this is at the heart of the vocation. This is why teachers teach, to make a difference, to actually make sure that everybody's voice is heard, and that the equality, the diversity and the inclusion is celebrated. And yet we do have a situation where schools are unable, not unwilling, but unable to meet the expectations of that sort of teaching and targets and etc. We could really, whoever that was, we could really go to town on this, couldn't we, and spend the rest of the session talking about that, because you're absolutely right. There needs to be some intervention. Now, AP may help with some of this if we have it as a sort of an arm from the educational system, but we also know and must respect the findings of this report was February this year, by the way, it's very recent, and we've got to respect and appreciate those findings in terms of we are not necessarily doing the right thing here with alternative provision. So we need to get it right in order to make sure that our children and young people are having the experiences that they deserve, and that we are not just removing a problem from an educational system. So thank you for that comment. Thanks, Charmaine.
Am I right to just add a few more, because there's been a lot
Oh, yes,
come through. Is that right? So
yeah,
like kind of leading on from that. So it's I think we don't need any comment on this, but it's useful to hear. But many
sure.
learners in prison education have been excluded from school and later disengaged with alternative provision. Many come to us, so I'm guessing you must be working in a prison setting. Many come to us with poor literacy and numeracy skills, no qualifications, and undiagnosed SEND needs. So that sort of highlights the need for the regulated. And there is a question as well here. Why are children allowed to be in unregulated establishments?
Mm-hmm. We absolutely. I mean, when we hear from the chief inspector that I'm referring to as an extract from this report, we also remain, these are his words, we also remain concerned about the widespread problems with unregistered alternative provision. And this is the bit here, after 12 years of calling for mandatory registration. I mean, did we even all appreciate that? I don't think I'd appreciated that until I came across it after 12 years of calling. It is clear that the need for reform is more urgent than ever because it is increasing, and we are allowing our children and young people to experience inconsistent experiences. And yeah, I've just got to sigh at that one because yes,
it seems
indeed. Why
shocking.
indeed?
It seems shocking that schools, colleges, there's so much regulation, and I mean I'm shocked. I don't think I knew that there's some alternative provisions that are not regulated. That's shocking.
Yeah,
Those who need it most, the
absolutely.
learners who need it most.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Anything else to share, Charmaine, or shall
I think
we?
there's quite a few lovely
I
comments
can't
that you
wait to
can
see
read at
them.
the end,
Yeah.
but those are the sort of the few that I've pulled out, if that's okay.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you. Thanks for sharing those, and thank you so much, for reading those and sharing them with us. Okay, so the report does conclude that we've seen some good care. We're trying to balance it now. Some good care delivered well, and we all know that. We'll probably all have seen that as well. But improvements are needed in both the commissioning and the delivery of this provision to ensure that the health, care, and education, the holistic needs of the children and young people that we're working with, are met. And young people at the moment, we're seeing more and more in terms of a rise in anxiety and so on. And young people might show that they're feeling anxious about school by not wanting to get up and get ready, saying they don't want to go or they can't go, worrying a lot about smaller issues and having the right equipment, for example, to go to their lesson, feeling sick, stomach aches, headaches, not sleeping well, all the things, that we associate with poor attendance is sort of becoming more and more and more increased. And persistent school absence is one of the most significant ongoing impacts of the pandemic, as we know. And the latest data is showing us that nearly one in four pupils was absent for 10% of school sessions in autumn 22, nearly double the position in 2019. One in four absent for 10%, and that has doubled in the space of a couple of years there. Now, the term school refusal and school avoidance have been used somewhat interchangeably So school refusal is the more common of the two, where a child insists that they don't want to go to school anymore, often directly after the summer or Christmas holidays, simply because they prefer their life in holiday mode or don't have to don't like having to go to bed too early. So school refusal, children may refuse to go to school at any age. But we've also got school avoidance. And I think we've kind of moving towards a bit of an overlap here where school refusal and school avoidance is actually something that we need to be very mindful in terms of why. We need to be thinking about why. We need to be thinking about all of those the emotional distress of why somebody doesn't want to be part of a peer group, why they would, what is this underlying issue? And the comment that Charmaine shared, the first comment there about the teachers are willing, because school refusal, school avoidance, and of course there are lots of SEND related issues and health related issues that I'm not underestimating here that contribute to that. But I think what's important is that we try and get to the underlying reasons, the underlying factors, and teachers can't do that on their own. And I know that we talk about pastoral sides and they're doing what they can. It would be wonderful if we had, and this is just me saying this now, it would be great if we had youth workers perhaps working within our schools to offer pastoral, obviously relative to the age range that we're working with, but there needs to be those resources and the support services to really help children and young people. School refusal, school avoidance, yes, there are some health and SEND related issues. Let's not underestimate that. And that absolutely is something that needs to be considered and always appreciated. But if we're saying school refusal and school avoidance doesn't matter, or that actually it's no big deal, it absolutely is a big deal. And we need to take that very, very seriously. On this next slide, because those are the things that grow and manifest into often disruptive behaviour, which is what we're talking about here. And what we don't want is to give children and young people that are struggling, and that's where the behaviour comes in. They're struggling with something. We need to try and help them to make sure that that EDI remains at the core of what we offer. There are some useful references and links and so on that have been included as part of the PowerPoint, but I'm conscious that I'm also representing Gemma. So I want to now share some information, some insights and experiences from Gemma. So we're sort of turning now onto a different aspect of EDI and looking at promotion and celebration of EDI in the classroom, because when this is right, when it works, oh my goodness, it's fantastic. And we listened to the case study that Helen shared with us, and how I gave her a name, so how Julie was feeling included and so on, and how she actually inspired and raised aspirations among the group. When it works, the buzz that you'll get as a teacher and as somebody working with children and young people is the reward, because there is the profession that's making the difference. So I'd like to share some insights and experiences from Gemma. And Gemma has delivered sessions around this topic in both a leadership setting and also in a teacher training context, and has herself worked with many diverse groups of students, as I'm sure we all have on the call, and including, she lists them, teaching GCSE English in a PRISM, supporting employability skills for Key Stage 3 students who've been excluded from mainstream education. So it's following on from this, and delivering entry-level ESOL classes in a community centre, in a community setting. So promoting equality and equity, promoting equity in education can be a catalyst for change within our classrooms, but also within education as a whole. By ensuring equitable access to resources, I'm just giving you time to read through what's on the slide here, opportunities, learning experiences and support, we can dismantle barriers that hinder students' potential. We can help narrow achievement gaps through fair assessment and teaching approaches, and sharing, cultivating more diverse and skilled learning communities, ultimately promoting equity in education, which is crucial for building a fairer, more prosperous future where every individual can contribute meaningfully to society. And there's some examples of this here on the slide. Tailor teaching methods to accommodate different learning styles, provide additional support and resources to students who need them, ensuring all students can access the curriculum. Use a variety of assessment methods to give all students a chance to demonstrate their understanding, and about that sort of fair allocation of resources. I'm drawn to the middle one here in terms of fair assessment practices, because I know that when we're working with children and young people and adults, when we're working in a teaching and learning environment, we absolutely think on our feet, don't we? We know what how to perhaps phrase something, approach something, use a different model, and our teaching and learning delivery will change to involve and to encourage participation and involvement in this way. But then the assessment all too often is going down the same channel, and we forget not. I'm just thinking of the wider scope in education here in terms of how we had to make things different in our teaching and delivery. And yet we are perhaps insisting that we assess things in the same way for all of our learners, children, young people, and adults. There's a lot on this slide. Promoting diversity in the classroom involves creating an environment where all students feel valued and respected, and where their diverse backgrounds and perspectives are celebrated and integrated into the learning experience. And I'm just returning to that point that I made right at the beginning, that I'm sure we can all acknowledge, is that feeling part of something, it's not the most obvious things. It's not just the most obvious SEND related things that we might think of in terms of, I need to make sure I have this particular piece of equipment so that Janet can hear, and so on. It's not just that, is it? It's about, how does somebody feel when they when they can't break into a social group, when they feel different from that social group? What's hindering them from being part of a peer group? How do we make sure that that individual is feeling involved? The social, cultural, the environment, the inspirations, the aspirations that that individual has. How do we create those equal chances? We talk about widening participation from a sort of the progress that an individual might make along their career trajectory and so on, along their educational journey. How do we recognize that in the classroom when actually somebody is feeling that they're not part of a social group? That sense of belonging and that feeling of being part of somebody in a feeling comfortable with your peers, as a young child, as a young person, as an adult, is key to everything. And to be able to then express how you're feeling and be part of a group, getting that right, however, is very, very, very challenging and tricky. So there are a wealth of resources that we can tap into to support our curriculum planning. Gemma goes on to say, such as the diversity calendar, an example on the screen here now. This allows us not only to be aware of cultural differences, but to deepen our understanding and create a teaching and learning environment that widens the horizon for our students. And thinking about, the traditions that individuals may be celebrating, may be experiencing, and being mindful of that when we're continuing along our teaching and learning. Promoting inclusion in the classroom ensures that every student, every child, every young person, every adult feels valued, respected, and supported, regardless of their background, abilities, individual needs, or identity. By modelling empathy, respect and kindness, we can create a sense of belonging for our students, where students feel they can bring their whole self to class, a feeling of being part of something. This is why a lot of behaviour issues, those underlying things, I feel different, I don't feel as good as, I feel inferior, I feel that I'm not able to be part of something. For whatever reason an individual feels like that, that feeling of inadequacy is going to have a massive impact on how we behave and on our disposition to learning, in fact, to everything. So Gemma goes on to say, deeply rooted in educational theory, from Maslow's hierarchy of needs to Adler's theory of belongingness, research has shown us that when students feel they belonged, they had an enhanced sense of worth and increased self-confidence. This can only lead to better outcomes, which benefits the students, our organisations, and our own professional development as teachers. So when we celebrate diversity, we can help students to appreciate and respect those different cultures. We've all got our own culture, our own background. It's all different than somebody else's. We're going to have similarities. We're going to have differences. We've all had unique experiences, and this is what we're talking about when we think about diversity. This approach fosters a more inclusive and enriching learning environment for all of us, teachers and students together. Not only does creating greater awareness help students with different backgrounds and needs to succeed, but it encourages acceptance and helps prepare students to thrive in an exceptionally diverse world. Gemma goes on to say thank you for joining us today, and we've shared our own experiences and positive messages around such a key topic in education. It's so wide, it's so diverse in itself, and includes many, many different things. We hope you feel empowered and inspired to promote and celebrate EDI in your classrooms and in your organisations. And I'm going to hand these last few minutes over to see if we have any more sort of questions or comments that might want to be shared. But first of all, I just want to draw your attention to this final slide, which allows feedback. And we're really keen to collect feedback to make sure that the Professional Development Week is offering you insight that is helping us to stop, to think, to reflect, to find some time to look at new reports and new areas that we may not have had the time to do before. So there is a QR code there that can be scanned, and I think Charmaine is going to may have already done this, the link into the chat so that you can take a few moments, please, to complete our feedback form. We really do appreciate the feedback so that we can make those necessary improvements. There's also something that I just want to share with you, and that's about digital credentials. So please note that a digital credential is available for this session on request. A digital credential is a portable representation of a certificate that you can add to your own professional development portfolio. And NCFE have mapped the criteria for this session to the DFE and ETF professional standards. So if that's something you would like, if you would like a digital credential, please do let us know in the feedback form by providing your name and email address and giving consent for us to share these with the Learning Vault, our digital credentials provider. And that's for the sole purpose of sending your digital badge. So that's really what I would like to say. I'm going to come back on camera now and just thank you once again for taking the time to come along to our session today. I can't wait to read through the chat. I've got to be honest, it's something that obviously hopefully you'll see it's something that interests me and drives the passion as it does, I know, with so many of us today. So thank you so much. Charmaine, I don't know if there's anything that you want to leave with as maybe a comment from the chat, or we've probably got a couple of minutes, have we?
There's we've got 5 minutes, and I can see already that some people are filling in the feedback form, which is jolly good. So the link is in the chat. But there were some comments around. I'll read it for you, Janet. So
thank you.
There's absolutely an impact from the pandemic. And I also feel that a lot of these symptoms are from anxiety and underlying mental health issues having a physical impact, which is also something that does need to be addressed. And this is true of learners with SEND, but also of those that may be classed as neurotypical.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. We've got to embrace that, haven't we? We've got to accept that. We've got to appreciate that. And then it's about, so how do we actually support the children and the young people, the adults? How do we support our learners to make sure that we can regain, or that they can regain the confidence that they need to be able to support themselves towards this healthy disposition for learning? And it's not just about learning, it's about that sense. I think Gemma mentioned it in one of her slides towards the end there, that feeling about the whole self, and being able to contribute, to feel that sense of self-worth and value. Yeah, absolutely. We shouldn't dismiss this. We dismiss that at our peril. Absolutely.
I've got a bit of a tricky question for you. This is I'm putting forward a question, okay?
Okay.
And I'd like to know your response. So say you're in a setting, and so we've talked a lot about the diversity in terms of quite a lot about additional needs, etc. But if it is and on the slide before where it's, celebrating diversity and, different various cultural, racial and ethnic groups, but say you're in a setting and it's not diverse, does that mean, so if I'm in a setting that's not diverse, should I just forget about all of that? In terms of, having, I don't know, different festivals or things in my calendar, or talking about people from other cultures. If everybody at my setting is from just the same culture, should I just not worry about that too much?
My initial response is we absolutely need to raise an awareness of the diverse, wonderful celebrations that we have within our communities, within our schools. If we're in a classroom, then we've got a wonderful opportunity. Regardless, we should be educating. We should be educating children, young people, and ourselves about the different diverse needs within our communities, within our society, because we need to have an appreciation of that to be able to make sure that we're continuing to put that the needs of other people, that we are recognizing that, because we're not going to be constrained into that classroom forever. We are part of a wider society, and we need to absolutely appreciate that, to value that. So education around those diverse needs of others should absolutely be something that we do, regardless of that immediate environment, would be my answer to that.
Thank you. Thank you to my rather devil's advocate question.
You're welcome.
Perfect. And there's lots of thank yous in the chat, and people do have to run off to other meetings.
Of course.
So we'll say thank you very, very much to everybody.
Thank you for your time, everyone. I hope you have a really good, if you're in education, a really good sort of countdown to your break, and a wonderful, well-deserved holiday and some time away from work. If you're not in education, I hope you've been able to find something here that you've been able to relate to, and I hope the rest of your working day, working week, etc., for everyone goes really well. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And unless anybody's got any further